Morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Let's see, we have a full agenda today, so I'm going to get us started. And I'm going to start us off with talking about a very special scholarship recipient. And then, commissioners, we have two walk-on items. So I will do those first, and then we'll move along to our budget today. So I'm going to come up here to the podium. I should also say that we have our lead students with us today. So let me start by welcoming our lead students. If you want to stand up, please stand up so that we can welcome you. So colleagues, you'll see the students with us around City Hall with Shannon. This is another group who are going to be a part of the Mayor's 100 and hopefully at the end of the lead training be paired up with some great employers throughout our city. Some may actually be employed right here at City Hall. So welcome. We're glad to have you. So next, I'm going to ask Mr. James Klein to come up here and join me. Do you want to come on up? So I am absolutely delighted to inform you that you are the recipient of the 2018 Dr. Schnorr Scholarship. As you know, this award recognizes students who have good records of achievement in high school, and the selection committee believes that you are an exemplary record of achievement. Your commitment to school and your eagerness to help others is inspiring. Congratulations on this well-deserved scholarship. I look forward to recognizing your achievement throughout our day. So this award is designated to apply to first-year tuition to any college or university recognized by the North Central Association of Schools and Colleges. So congratulations. All right, so commissioners, next that will take us to our agenda items. And can I get a motion to suspend the rules?
Support.
All right, so rules are suspended, and this is for the liquor license request.
Yes. You want to go?
Sure.
I think Amanda was waiting.
I would say, is it?
I got it though.
Okay, go ahead.
So 40 acres, as you all know, is up and going, and with their liquor license, the commission approved a liquor license or recommended a liquor license approval back in November for a DDA license. But it's not a rehab, it's a brand new facility, so it doesn't follow that. So I'm not exactly sure how we got into this area, but they have the Liquor Commission has a workaround, so they're going to get a resort subsection 4 license, and the state can give out 15 of those for there's certain criteria, and even though it's not a resort, it talks about a restaurant. And so they have to have these criteria, and 40 acres hits all of those criteria. And the mayor, you explained yesterday that they are ready they can approve it by the end of the week.
Yeah.
So
commissioners, rules are suspended. That's the resolution before us. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, so I will just add my thanks to our city clerk and our city attorney's office who worked really hard yesterday to get this all ready for us to consider this morning and approve. And again, this is really just, in my opinion, it's a technical issue, it's a type of license, and this is just an amendment to the original resolution that we approved to provide for a different type of liquor license. So any other questions about that? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, and then next I have another walk-on item for the 4th of July fireworks. Can I get a motion to suspend the rules?
So moved. Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Okay, so we have, I don't have the exact resolution in front of me other than it says 4th of July fireworks. So Eric, do you want to talk to us about this or tee it up so I can get a motion on the table?
We have our fire marshal, Rick Doctor, in the audience who could explain this a little bit, but this is to approve our annual firework event that is a tradition here. And so,
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning, Rick. Rick, before you start, Commissioners, can I get a motion for the 4th of July fireworks?
So moved. Support.
All right. Welcome, Rick.
There's nothing really new or special. We've been holding this and throughout the years. It's just due to the commission meetings that it came up unusually. There's really nothing to share.
Yeah. So timing-wise is the issue. Rick, any changes from last year?
No, it should be the same. They'll be shooting from Gillette Bridge, and we'll have the same setup as usual.
Great. And is it going to fall on 4th of July?
Oh, it's on the 7th this year on Saturday.
Okay. So the following Saturday, because 4th of July is on a Wednesday.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. We'll make sure our events committee gets that out.
Yep.
And people are aware of it. All right.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, Commissioners? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Thank you, Rick. Thanks for coming down. All right, Commissioners, now that will take us to our other items that were in our original packet. First one is a resolution authorizing the assistant to the city manager to execute a contract with First Tee of West Michigan to provide life and golf skill instruction to GRPS students at Indian Trails Golf Course.
So moved. Support.
All right, Asante, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, ma'am. Some people from the First Tee are going to be here. I don't know if they're going to be able to make it, though. But what this is an agenda item to have the First Tee partner with GRPS in the city of Grand Rapids. The SAFE Task Force recommends this collaboration. The SAFE Task Force report investigated the root causes for violence in our community, and they came up with 5 peace pillars. We have prevention investment, eliminate violent acts, activate economic opportunities, community engagement, education and empowerment, and to affect positive change in public institutions. This collaboration really hits the community engagement and also the, affecting positive change in public institutions. And so what we would do is we would bring over 600 students to the Indian Trails Golf Course. GRPS is partnering with transportation costs. They would come out to the golf course. They'd get life skills through golf instruction. We've worked with First Tee before in the past, and this is an opportunity to get students engaged with a resource that they might not be readily accessible to them. So this would this would unlock opportunities for those students. Once the students participate, for a minimum cost, they can come back to the golf course and get more services through the First Tee throughout the school year. This is also building on some programs and efforts at GRPS. They have a trial golf program at some of the high schools also. So this is bringing students to the golf course to use the golf course. The ask is $21,500. These would be funds from the SAFE Task Force. The event would actually happen in September, though. It won't happen this year. We weren't able to get that done in this fiscal year, but the event will happen in next year.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, see if you have any questions or comments for Asante. I have been told by our city attorney that there is one amendment that needs to be made to this about who is authorized to sign the contract. But I'll first see if there's any questions or comments for Asante before I ask for that amendment. Commissioner?
I'll just briefly share a little bit more background. So most of you attended the pitch night in December for SAFE, and First Tee actually pitched that evening. And so after that, we had some interest from our Parks and Rec department for that program. And so a few conversations happened, and then after that, First Tee modified how they pitched to narrowly focus on a specific targeted age group, which is tied to SAFE's purpose. And this is what came from that. They came before SAFE, I think, twice.
Twice. The original December 6, 2017, and then they came to the task force immediately twice.
Twice. And so this is the result of that, and we're looking forward to this kind of three-way partnership. So it's kind of like a win-win-win in my book when I think about Indian Trails, And then recreation for youth, and then also the schools, and being a partner in this is just kind of like this really good fit. Thank you, Asante, for your hard work on this, and the countless meetings that you've had outside of the meetings that came before SAFE.
And before, I don't want it to be forgotten, we do have a Safe Pitch and Highlight Night. It's June 19th at the Kroc Center. It starts at 6 o'clock. All applications need to be in by the 14th. That's all available through the website.
Yeah, if you can just briefly share a little bit more for our lead students, what a pitch night is. So it's tied to any idea that people may have, individuals or organizations, with how to reduce violence in creative ways.
Yes, so I know these fantastic students have tremendous ideas on how to reduce violence in our community. The Pitch and Highlight Night is an opportunity for individuals. Any of you could participate. There aren't any age restrictions. So individuals with good ideas on how to reduce violence, you could enter into a partnership with the City of Grand Rapids for $1,000. If it's a nonprofit, it would be $10,000 of opportunity. It's going to be, as I said, on the 19th of June. You can see me afterwards, and I can point you out to the application information. But I'm sure you guys have ideas about how to reduce violence in our community, and we would welcome any of those ideas.
Great. Thank you, Asante. And I am going to add my thanks to Commissioner Lanier for your leadership and for helping with the pitch night and for following up, because right after the pitch night, you had a whole list of individuals who you met that night that you followed up with, and this being one of them. So thank you for that. So Commissioners, I'll turn to our City Attorney just to explain the amendment, and then I'll ask for a motion for the amendment.
Thank you. Where it says resolved, that the assistant to the city manager is hereby authorized to execute the contract for $21,500, that needs to be amended to reflect that the mayor is the one that's authorized to do that contract.
So can I get amendment for that?
So moved.
Support.
All right. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
And then all those in favor of the amended resolution say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Okay. All right, thank you. That will take us to our next one, and that is a resolution.
Well, you have the original motion yet.
Pardon?
Sorry. I missed that. Still working on the amendments.
Oh, yes. So who moved and seconded?
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Good.
So next, that will take us to our second item, and that is a resolution setting the date to consider the publication of a proposed ordinance to add Chapter 182 to the Code of the City of Grand Rapids entitled Electric Patrol Vehicles.
Support.
All right.
Hello, Commissioners. This is kind of a cleanup type ordinance. It would be a new ordinance for us, but the Motor Vehicle Code and state law allows for electric patrol vehicles to be utilized by emergency responders, parking enforcement, and law enforcement. City staff actually worked with our state legislators to get the state law changed to modernize what an electric patrol vehicle means. That can be anything from like a four-wheeled golf cart type thing to like a three-wheeled type Segway type vehicle. And so the city staff worked with state law to modernize what that sort of industry for electric patrol vehicle means under the code, what type of equipment is required, and also clarified that city employees that operate on these can ride them on the sidewalk. But the state law requires that there be a city ordinance in place that state law authorizes it, but a city has to adopt an ordinance saying, yes, we want these in our city. So with the state law change, we are introducing an ordinance to just incorporate the state law to allow these vehicles to be operated in compliance with state law. Just to clarify on the subject line, because I think it's a little bit confusing, this today is for the resolution asking for the publication of the ordinance and setting the consideration for July 10th. At that time, the request of the police department, who's sort of asking that this ordinance be put in place, is that the ordinance be given immediate effect, because the state law that they're incorporating will become effective June 24th. And so instead of having that additional 30 days if the ordinance is voted in and given to an effect, they kind of wanted to shorten that and just go with what state law allows, assuming you pass the ordinance.
Thank you. You were reading and I asked the city attorney that very thing. I'm like, usually I don't see on cow immediate effect.
Yeah.
So that is for July 10th.
Correct.
So in the evening, commissioners, we've done this in the past. If there's support, we'll ask for immediate effect. Thanks. All right, commissioners, any questions? I feel like we've talked about this for a while. I know those of us in legislative committee, we've been pushing the state to make these changes for a while now. I can't quite remember how long. I feel like it's been a long time. Couple years. And so we're glad to see this move forward. Any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, next that will take us to a resolution providing for the publication of a proposed ordinance to repeal and replace in its entirety Chapter 42 of Title 3 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids entitled Trees.
So moved.
Support.
All right, and we have Mr. Sulek and Mr. Marquardt coming up.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. David Marquardt, Director of Parks and Recreation. Repeal and replace, those are big words. I think the important piece to note here before I let Joe come up to explain a little bit about these changes is that as we, of course, work through our sustainability plan and forestry, these are important changes to help us with that continuous improvement process that we've got within the Forestry Division, within Parks and Recreation. And on top of that, as we move forward with some of the changes in organizationally and making ourselves more operationally efficient, some of these changes in this chapter of the code are important to help us along those lines. So Joe, if you'd like to walk us through some of those highlights of the ordinance.
Sure. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. So our ordinance basically, this is a culmination of a 5-year process. You may remember a few years back, Commission approved a consultant to come in and actually talk to us about that and recognize 3 areas of the city's code charter that has to do with trees: stormwater, the development code, and then the tree ordinance. And the stormwater and development code have been handled, and this is now the tree ordinance that focuses on public trees. The main changes in this one were one, designation of a landmark tree. And what that does is it basically recognizes trees that have either status or ecological benefit, something I call distinguished citizens of our community. And then the second thing is Urban Forest Committee has actually been increased to 11 members instead of 9. Those members would be one more mayoral appointee and then a representative from a nonprofit tree organization. Friends is filling that role right now. And so giving them an official status on the Urban Forest Committee. Establishing a tree bank. The zoning ordinance actually talked about a tree bank, but we didn't have one officially, and so that is one of the things in this ordinance. And the fourth is to simplify and clarify the permit process for city staff, contractors, and utility companies that work within the city.
Great. All right, commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner?
Yes, first of all, thank you for all this work, Joe, and I wanted to thank Kristen too for stepping in and really working with the committee on all the language and clarifications. I do have one question about this, it's Article 6, public nuisances. The word lethal, would a lethal tree, does that mean like an emerald ash borer? Would that be an example?
I think it's it references more of a disease or insect or infestation that would be lethal to not only one tree but a whole population of a certain species.
Okay, so that's a good example of that. Well, again, I just want to thank you. I know this has been a long process. We pushed pause for a while, or the committee did, and looked at stormwater first and brought people in to discuss that and its impact on the development community. So just done a really thorough job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. All right, others? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution setting the date to consider amending the zoning ordinance relative to adult daycare, adult foster care, and text associated with the implementation of the Granville Avenue Area Specific Plan.
So moved.
Support.
All right, Suzanne Schultz, you want to tell us about this?
morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So this is these are quickies. The adult daycare and adult foster care, what we found, especially as we have an aging population and different needs in our community, that our ordinance isn't set up to make it easy to allow this type of use. And so in our low density residential zone district currently, it's not a permitted use. It is in our mixed density residential zone district. And so this amendment would allow for adult daycare and adult foster care in those districts. The other amendment is to change and allow Clyde Park to be considered as part of the Granville area-specific plan recommendations. They talked about Granville Avenue as being a corridor that they would allow residential and office uses. In this case, we didn't wrap it around and pick up Clyde Park, which actually the street bends, and you pick up a piece of that. And so this amendment would just allow for that to be considered as well, as we do have a development project that's proposed that would fit that amendment. So that's it.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, pretty straightforward. Any questions?
Just a clarification then, Suzanne, I understand that. So this regulation on ground floor office space is specific to this area then?
Yes, it's only for this, yes. We are, I would say that I know Southtown, their SID board's looking at areas and modifications. You know, as we've been doing this, we can be more nuanced in, and I think that's what we're starting to see in other business districts. And so,
right.
And others have resisted it too. Some feel very strongly that they don't want that. So I think we're going to be looking at a more tailored approach rather than just one district, probably almost one district and a sub-district over time. But today, this would allow for office uses.
Well, I know North Quarter is talking about doing that, Uptown has, and it sounds like Southtown is as well. That's great that they're looking at it more minutely in their own district, so thanks.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right. Next, that will take us to a resolution setting a public hearing on proposed zoning ordinance text amendments related to medical marijuana.
So moved. Support.
All right, Suzanne.
All right, so
Take it
here we
away.
go. Yeah, in March 2010, the City Commission approved medical marijuana caregivers as a home occupation, and that was when the Medical Marijuana Act first passed. And then in September 21st, 2016, Governor Snyder signed a bill that would expand the type of medical marijuana facilities permitted under state law and established a licensing program. There are 5 categories that are included in that legislation for growers, processors, provisioning centers, secure transporters, and safety compliance facilities. The law requires that a community opt in and pass a resolution basically declaring what you're opting in to or for and what the regulations are. And so we are looking at amending the zoning ordinance, which would allow Grand Rapids to opt in and allow for dispensaries, growers, processors, provisioning centers are dispensaries, the transporters, and the safety compliance facilities. We have, for a while now, held kind of a wait and see attitude, and this is because the act that was passed in 2016 allowed for LARA, the licensing agency for these facilities, to have until December 15th of 2017 to establish their rules. Depending on how you work through licensing, there can be rules that affect zoning. And in our experience with working with the Michigan Liquor Control Commission and how we regulate alcohol, the state approach is similar through LARA in regulating marijuana. And we wanted to make sure that we understood what their rules were before we created our own. Once that was passed, then the recreational request or ballot measure was being proposed with petitions. And there's the question about whether or not it would be on the ballot. There are differences in the recreational language that's being proposed for vote in November compared to the Medical Marijuana Facilities Act. So again, we thought it would be wise to wait and see, because we were spending a lot of staff effort and a lot of the commission's time on something that could dramatically change in a matter of a few months. There was a petition that was announced on April 20th that said we want to allow an unlimited number of facilities within the city of Grand Rapids. There's a great concern about allowing an unlimited number in the city for several reasons. One is that we are a regional center of 1 million people. the city's population is 200,000, and our surrounding jurisdictions have been very clear that they are not going to allow marijuana in their jurisdictions. And so that really places, I think, a significant burden on our business districts and industrial areas where marijuana could be allowed, particularly if there's an unlimited number, and what that might mean for our areas. The marijuana business is a cash-only business. Banking institutions are not allowed to recognize it because of federal law. And as such, then you run into cases where it's been very lucrative in other states and where you look in other locations. We also have Michigan experience looking at what happened in Lansing, Ann Arbor, and Detroit, where an unlimited number started off, and all three communities later realized that they needed to put a cap and pull it back a little bit to better manage their business districts, because these businesses, being cash only and lucrative, can pay more in rent than any of the other businesses in an area and really take over. So you're seeing many communities have a cap or required separation distances for these areas. And that was really another reason to wait and see, is to watch what happens in other communities and learn from their experience, so that we can be very thoughtful in our approach and serve in the best interest of the citizens of Grand Rapids. So what has been proposed, we started this conversation as staff some time ago between the attorney's office, the police department, a clerk's office, and the planning department to do some extensive research and analysis on different approaches throughout the country, as well as in the state of Michigan. And we looked particularly at ordinances from Denver, Ann Arbor, Los Angeles, and Phoenix, and modeled these regulations looking at the city of Grand Rapids and our land uses, and what are some of the typical areas that more sensitive uses that we need to take into consideration. For example, schools have drug-free school zones, and you have to have a 1,000-foot buffer around those. We also looked at daycare centers, parks, rehab facilities, religious institutions, and the like. And then we also took into consideration surrounding jurisdictions, knowing that there's some sensitivity from them about what uses might be on their border. We've also met with those surrounding jurisdictions. In fact, on May 20th, we had a recent meeting with them to get their feedback on this ordinance and to review that with them. In general, their feedback was positive. They did express a concern about a buffer around our jurisdictional boundaries. The language as it was originally proposed to the Planning Commission had us treating all of the uses that we would have a buffer around the city similar in surrounding jurisdictions. A cleaner approach and more preferred by the surrounding jurisdictions is just simply a 1,000-foot buffer. That language has been provided in the proposed ordinance for you. On May 24th, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on the ordinance that would allow for medical marijuana facilities in some commercial and industrial zone districts. They looked at the different types of uses that could possibly be allowed. Initially, there was some concern about whether or not we wanted to have growing facilities and food, or growing and marijuana processing in our industrial districts, similar to the discussion I mentioned in commercial districts kind of taking over. There's also a concern about the limited amount of industrial land that we have in the city for businesses and expansion of industrial users in our community, particularly because we're an incubator. In discussing with that concern with our economic development folks in the right place, there did not seem to be extensive concern about a concentration, or as long as there's some separation distances and some consideration about how many uses go into those districts, there wasn't a particular concern about their placement there. We looked at how we evaluate based on, again, I mentioned Detroit, Lansing, and Ann Arbor, and trying to set a cap or a quota on the number of facilities that could be possible in the city. We determined that based on our research, a quota system where we define a specific number ends up quite often in litigation. There's a lot of debate about who chooses, who gets that license. Rather, that we would suggest kind of a buffer, a separation of buffers that sets those distances, which in fact starts to limit the locations that you can possibly put those facilities in. And so, as proposed, the ordinance as originally written would have 1,000 feet of a buffer from a child care center, public or private K-12 school, publicly owned park or playground, church or place of worship, substance abuse clinic or rehab facility, and then 250-foot separation from residential zone districts, and then 600 feet from another facility. So you couldn't have another marijuana business within 600 feet of one another. The ordinances drafted, though, would allow for the stacking of licenses for grow facilities. So if you have a large building and you have multiple license holders, they could share a location. And it does allow for co-location in industrial districts. So you could have a grow facility and a testing lab and a dispensary all together in one facility. In our conversations with LARA, we met specifically with the licensing agent from LARA who does the work around medical marijuana, and he observed that the businesses that have been involved in what he views as the best run and well managed are those locations where they've experienced co-location of facilities because they can run it as a fully formed business. Also included in the proposed ordinance is a good neighbor plan with a voluntary equitable development agreement. The development plan with the voluntary equitable development agreement would allow for negotiation and an understanding of how the operation will work within our community, particularly around working with their neighbors and understanding and operations of the use, security measures that would be needed to be taken, and understanding crime prevention through environmental design to be able to ensure that we are not running into issues. There's also, the state law also allows for a $5,000 annual fee to help defray administrative and enforcement costs, and that is included in this proposal. When we looked through the mapping exercise, given those parameters that I just described, we found that we would have about approximately 99 acres of commercially zoned land and 318 acres of industrial zoned land that would be deemed suitable for up to 43 medical marijuana facilities. For the purposes of this discussion, suitable land refers to land that is zoned commercial or industrial and meets the required separation distances required by the proposed ordinance. I have provided you with a whole series of maps, and in those maps you have both the city models where we took their requirements and applied them in Grand Rapids, the location of those sensitive uses. I mentioned schools, childcare, rehab facilities, parks, religious institutions, and municipal borders. And then we also looked at equity using our vital streets data, and we also mapped transit lines so that we could look at is there access via transit to those areas. We also know that some people are interested in crime statistics and whether or not there's any correlation. We did include robbery and assault, violent crime, and property crime mapping in this data set as well. The Planning Commission, when they reviewed this information, made some different recommendations than what was originally in the proposed piece. Part of that was due to what they heard in public comment. They heard a lot of public comment regarding medical marijuana and the need for people to receive their medicine. And so they were looking at it more as a pharmaceutical use or an office use, and came to the conclusion that they did not need to have so many buffers included with the separation distance requirements. I would kind of, as your director, urge caution in that regarding, and when you're looking at the Recreational Act upcoming in November, it's polling very high, and I think you want to try to treat this similarly within that context of if it goes recreational, rather than looking at this point in time, which is really one of the reasons why we've waited on proposing some of these because of the changing landscape. This is a quickly shifting area. So they looked at it strictly from a medical sense. In their summary of changes, the Planning Commission recommended the following. That they wanted to clarify the ordinances directly for medical marijuana use only, similar to a medical office use. They recommended including growers and processors. They suggested dividing the separation distances for provisioning centers or dispensaries from other marijuana facilities. So they changed the number from 600 feet for dispensaries to 1,000 feet. And for all other uses, they kept them at 600 feet. And then for the separation distances from other sensitive uses, they kept the 1,000 feet from child care centers, schools, and parks for dispensaries, and then eliminated all other items for churches, place of worship, rehab facilities, and residential zone districts entirely. They also, for the other uses, removed parks from that consideration. They eliminated the separation distances between jurisdictional boundaries for all uses and recommended eliminating the requirement for a voluntary equitable development agreement as well as the annual licensing fee. If we looked at the Planning Commission recommendations, we also mapped those, and they are also included in your data packet. It would allow for approximately 1,900 acres of commercial and industrial zone land to be considered suitable for a medical marijuana facility. And it would allow for an estimated 145 marijuana dispensaries and up to 377 other facilities within the city of Grand Rapids. And so I've provided you with both the ordinance language as originally drafted, and that is just in the black print form. Following that, you have that as a base and then a red line version of what the planning commissions would mean for that ordinance, as well as your data packet. So are there any questions?
All right, thank you, Suzanne. That was a great summary. So commissioners, open it up for questions or comments, and then a decision point for us today is setting a public hearing and what zoning ordinance text amendments we're recommending for the public hearing. So the original language or some of the changes that were recommended by the Planning Commission. So I'll open it up first for...
Point of clarification. I mean, I assume that because we send it to the Planning Commission, what is on the floor for going to public hearing in our body is the recommendation that they provided us, correct?
You can actually, the state enabling legislation allows the city commission to either act upon the Planning Commission recommendations or to basically decline them. You do not have to follow the Planning Commission recommendation. You can,
yeah, they're
as long as
advisory
it's-
and recommendations.
Correct.
And it's up to us to decide what to move forward. So commissioners, I'll open it up for questions, comments, clarifications.
Of the public comment at the Planning Commission, how many were in support and how many were in opposition?
Most were in support. We did not have any neighborhood representation at the public hearing.
There's a neighborhood meeting this week, is my understanding.
Well, in the neighborhoods met also, because I happened to attend that one. Came in at the end of it with Suzanne through Stacy's program.
I mean, I'm in support of moving the Planning Commission recommendations forward. I mean, we asked them for their opinion. They're the ones who deal with land use on a regular basis. It's not like we don't have the opportunity to make modifications after that, but we ask for, we appoint those folks to be our land use experts and provide us their opinions. And so I'd like to respect that.
Okay, other thoughts, commissioners?
So again, just a clarification, what we would be voting on that we just, the motion is to address the Planning Commission's recommendations.
Oh, so Commissioner, are you making a formal motion to move forward the...
So moved.
Okay, so do I have a second to move forward the Planning Commission recommendations? Okay, so we have a second, so that discussion is on the floor. So commissioners, do we move forward with the recommendations from the Planning Commission or not? So discussion about that? Commissioner?
Yes, so I appreciate the motion that's on the floor. I actually think that that some people are visual, and in a lot of ways, this packet, Suzanne, that you've provided, that kind of gives a lot of different scenarios to help people to understand what this decision will impact. I actually think this is a better way of trying to communicate to the public what it is we're trying to accomplish. So then we will probably hear, because it doesn't necessarily have to be this or that, there's a combination of things that could be in play here. But this isn't anyone's recommendation, right? So how do we frame it in such a way, and I don't know if you have opposition to that, but how do we frame it in such a way that we can allow the public, and I know that they could, if they have, if they're savvy enough, they could do this electronically on their own, but how do we communicate something like this to the public so that they can kind of get a visual of the multiple options? If if you're in favor of this, this is what this looks like, or it may help people to know what they're in favor of and what they may have opposition for. I think in the other pieces, how do we make sure we also, in the publication, help people to understand that this decision isn't regarding medical marijuana in isolation? To your point that in the event that Lansing makes a decision, or we all make a decision as a state about recreational marijuana, it will have impact on the decision that we're making now. So in some ways, this is an interim decision. And so how do we kind of help people to understand that, and that whatever it is that you're thinking or deciding as you're providing input during public comment, that, or during the public hearing, that those things too should be taken into consideration. And I know that's a lot, but I just think it's kind of how we've been digesting all of this, and it would be great to kind of hear feedback in that same context.
Yeah. There are a number of alternatives in the basically it's the second full page. We do provide, and it probably just needs to be labeled clearer, but the proposed ordinance amendments are the ones captured that are as written. And then if you flip it, we provided mapping for, if you go back 2 more pages, the Planning Commission recommendations. So it's there. I think we just probably have to frame it differently. A story map, similar to what we did for the housing compendium. We had this, if you looked at the story map that we did, which was really visual, we could probably do it in a very easy online format that might be a little bit more understandable to the community. We do have all the data. It wouldn't be that hard to be able to provide. If you are inclined to do that and think about options, I would suggest that you would want to notice for the entirety of the ordinance. The Planning Commission basically deleted sections. Should you want to put them back in, it's easier to take them out after you've had your hearing than to have them deleted. And just from a noticing and legal standpoint, it would be better to have it all in and then take it out rather than leave pieces out and notice.
But that, I mean, we've had this conversation before, guys. I mean,
Again,
why
and
are we
ladies.
asking the Planning Commission to waste their time? There's a bunch of stuff that they have to get done, and we send them information. We say, have an 8-hour meeting, have public comment. Here's our recommendation, and then we don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it?
But Commissioner, let's let others weigh in, because we don't always agree with the Planning Commission,
Then
and
why
that's
did we ask them to do the job?
okay. It's, you know what, their input is helpful, but we have to listen to other people's
And
input too.
again, we're setting ourselves up
Commissioner-
to take something away. Every
Commissioner-
time we do this, and we put stuff in a document, and then we decide we wanna, let's put it all in there, and then when this body decides to take it out, it looks like we're taking something away. We're setting ourselves up for criticism and failure.
Well, I think people have a different opinion about that. So we appreciate your input. I'm gonna let other commissioners weigh in as we move forward. Commissioner?
I just had a couple of questions. When I read through the meeting minutes for the Planning Commission, the discussion around VITA and the $5,000 fee, they essentially, what I understood from the minutes was that they didn't feel like that was something that the Planning Commission could decide. So my question is, if we move forward the Planning Commission's recommendations for the motion on the table, can we, since they didn't feel like they were allowed to do that, can we talk about those 2 items?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Commissioners, others, the motion before us is to move forward with the language. Commissioner?
I just want to say that I do appreciate the work that was put forward by the Planning Commission, and there are some aspects of it that I like, some of the points that I agree with, and there are others that I don't agree with. And so I'm not at all in favor of moving forward with approving what they have submitted, and yet I can appreciate my colleagues' frustration in terms of asking them to put time and effort into it, but I think that that's one of the benefits of having the system that we have, is they can make a recommendation, and I think it's possible for us to disagree without being disagreeable, and that's where I sit. I think that there's some benefits to it, but when I look at what they're suggesting for the map, some of the areas, I'm not at all kosher with what they've suggested altogether. So I'm not in favor of moving forward with their recommendation.
Yeah. Thanks, Commissioner. Others? Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, well, I feel like we have a lot more to learn in this too, and we are learning as we go, like you said, from other cities. Interesting that Ann Arbor and Detroit and Lansing have pulled back a bit. I recognize that this is, like Commissioner Lanier said, a first step, so we will be looking at recreational marijuana as well. I do have a real concern about the city being the only place in the metropolitan statistical area that would allow this. It's unfortunate that our sister cities, you know, when they have their own bodies to make their decisions. But it would create a situation where we are the go-to area. At the same time, you know, we need to respect the need for medical marijuana. We have to remember that we still do have home occupations, that there is
It's still
marijuana
allowed.
available, of course. It's not like there isn't any. But I too would like to start, I'd like more time to digest and to hear from the public what they think about this in the form that the Planning Commission, or that the Planning Department presented initially. I too am very interested in the voluntary equitable agreement we have heard from, and I had a little bit of time with the group from the neighborhoods too. They were very interested in this and the potential there, and I don't know that the Planning Commission would have been privy to any of that information. But I think it's new. It's a new policy for us, but I think there's tremendous potential here around being equitable. We've looked at what Portland has done, for example, and Seattle, in terms of trying to recognize that there are communities that have been harmed in the past because of the consequences of marijuana when it's totally illegal, and how can we repair that harm in some way. So we have a lot more conversations to be had about that, and that's probably where you're coming from, Commissioner Rucker. But I like to start with a more conservative approach, and then want to hear from the community. And I think it's an opportunity for us to, through a public hearing, to learn from people and to also educate at that time, because we're going to get more people out and more input and more opportunity to again talk about the equitable issues around this proposal.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any others who, Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think one of my biggest frustrations about this is, as we sat as a body in a closed session to determine what steps we should take and how we should approach this, you said, I'm working on some maps, and I said, based on the feedback that you have and the design of the zoning changes that you're going to recommend, will they be allowed in our traditional business districts? And you said, absolutely. And I look at this first map, and there is not one traditional business district where a provisioning center is allowed. Not one. The 39 sites or whatever it is, there's not one traditional business district where someone could have access to the medicine that they need. And so, again, I'm really terribly frustrated by that. We're going to put 39 sites out that are owned by someone else. It does not mean that any one of those sites could potentially be purchased, and we are only then exacerbating the problem of increasing the cost and the value of those sites in those 39 locations, rather than spreading it around throughout our community in places. Again, with any of this, we have a public hearing. That's important. We're going to hear feedback from the public, whether it's about 39 sites or 3,000 sites. It doesn't matter. We're going to get feedback from our neighborhoods, from our residents, from our business districts, and we're going to get some feedback, and we have the ability as a body to go then make thoughtful changes to try to accommodate what we think is the best approach for our community. And I'm all for having that discussion in the debate. I think, again, my frustration stems from, we have recommendations from someone a group of individuals we've entrusted with their perspectives, with their time, with their diligence, with their training, with their knowledge to give us recommendations. And clearly, you have a position, Suzanne, and you're going to be meeting with people, and you just as you presented to us, you presented a perspective, given your professional background, and I respect that. I respect where you're being conservative because of the unknown. I understand that, but I also feel like we as a body are not giving this a full faith effort. If we're going to say we're going to limit it to these 39 sites. Now, today's not the day to debate where the sites are. Mm-hmm. We need to let the community weigh in, but at the same time, I still don't understand why we ask of time and of energy of people to not respect what they ask for. We have the ability to make changes, but we should respect the professionalization of the most important body in this community outside of the city commission in terms of their ability to have influence over the certain things in Grand Rapids. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like we're doing them a disservice, and we're doing this community a disservice if we don't give them the opportunity to be heard. We can talk about both things. We're gonna get feedback from the community either way. They're gonna tell us it's too aggressive or it's not aggressive enough. But we owe it to the people that we appointed to hear that out.
You know what, Commissioner, I appreciate your input. Our responsibility is to the community, not to an appointed body.
I understand that.
And we also need to consider the expertise and what other communities have learned about this process that weighed into some of the recommendations that are before us. There's a lot of examples throughout not just this state, but this country, and we need to take into consideration both the pros and the cons and come up with a very thoughtful recommendation. It's a first step. This is a complex issue. So Commissioner Allen and then Commissioner Lanier.
Well, since I seconded the motion, I felt I should at least comment on that. And I really, in general and in brief, I feel as though we've started down a slippery slope as a board when it comes to, I mean, I've served on this committee for appointments for 2.5 years, and it seems like every time, I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna deny the fact that this is controversial. Every single time it seems like we have something that's controversial, we pull back and then we get paralysis by analysis. And I just feel at least, and it's happening more and more often with the Planning Commission, and because they're the ones who make some of the most controversial decisions, rezoning and all those kind of things. So I just think we have had many times where something has come before us, we put it forward for a public comment, and there's overwhelming public comment, and we pull back and we either table it for a while or we don't make a decision. I feel like this at least deserves that. That's because it's polling so high, there's statewide support for it. We've also had several instances where we've approved things and said, well, let's give it a try, let's evaluate it in a year. If we have to pull it back, then we do. So it's just, my agreement with Commissioner O'Connor is on process, not particularly necessarily on this issue. And it just seems to be happening more and more.
Well, I think that's a much larger conversation,
Yep,
and there's also opinions about why we currently are having struggles.
Agreed.
So I'm not going to get into that here.
I just wanted to put it on record.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that. Commissioner Lanier.
Commissioner, I do understand and respect your position and the frustration that you're experiencing. I see it differently. I think that that this is part of being a public institution, that you'll have a body make a decision for recommendations, and then it's up to this body to receive and put forward those recommendations or modify them. And I think just as much as they're experts and they've done their due diligence, it's up to us now to do the same thing before we put this before the entire city. I also think that, I think because you are pretty savvy in this conversation and in this topic, you may believe people are more aware than they are. And so quite frequently I'm trying to bring things down to a level so that everyone can understand what's being put before us. And it's because not everyone is well studied as you are on particular topics. So when we get to these very complex topics, I think it's important for us to make sure that the public is fully aware of what it is. And that's why I'm asking for more details to be a part of the discussion. So some people may not attend the daytime meeting of the Planning Commission. Some people may not even know that the Planning Commission even exists, and what their role is, and how they interact with this body. But they do know we exist, and they do know that city policy is decided here at this table. And so I think it's up to us now to help the public to understand what medical marijuana means, what it means for this community, and what it is we're trying to decide. I don't think this will be paralysis in analysis. I think we owe it to the community for them to fully understand what it is that's before us and how it will impact us. So this is our very first public discussion, and so I'm okay with making sure that we do whatever it is that it takes to make sure that the public is aware so that we truly can hear from the public, not what the Planning Commission has heard in their meetings that take place during the daytime, but what we will hear at 7 p.m. meetings such as the one tonight in subsequent meetings. And so we don't have to take several months to do this, but I want us to take as much time as possible so that the public can be aware. And when I think about the process that we're embarking on with regarding the housing with WMCAT, I think this is another one of those topics because it's very complex. And we are talking about not just now, but later. And people need to fully understand as they're providing comment that they're educated enough. Frequently we have people come, they'll share an opinion during public comment, or even at times during a public hearing, or at times during public comment that quite frankly may not make sense. Or it may not necessarily be exactly what they're supposed to be commenting on. And for topics like these, we need to make sure people are aware of what it is that they're sharing feedback on, because then we won't just hear, don't do it or do it. We'll hear some meaningful feedback from people as they're kind of weighing out all of these options. Suzanne, I think this is actually really helpful. So I don't know if you need to redo it, but maybe in the headings is probably where there could be some rework in order for people to fully understand what's a part of those headings and what the content means.
Yep, just a reformatting, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Jones, then Repart, then Kelly, and then I'll make a couple comments and we'll call the question.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I just want to join in and supporting what Commissioner Lanier laid out, and that is, again, the critical importance of really being very, very thoughtful in how this is communicated and give every opportunity possible for community to engage. We're talking about something that is it's new to all of us, and this is unlike any other thing that I think has come before the Planning Commission. And I think, to my colleague's point, to Commissioner O'Connor, I think everybody involved has an opinion on the direction in which this should go. I think whether it's the planning department and even the Planning Commission, I think that we're all over the place. I mean, when I look at this, I'm reminded that there's the recommendation or the suggestion of, I think the number was 43 locations or 43 sites, and the Planning Commission has 377. That's what I would call a pretty significant gap. And so I don't, the answer clearly is somewhere in between, but I know, I'm pretty certain that if, for a number that significant, I think we would need to prepare ourselves for taking pretty significant criticism from community. And there would also be those who would be very supportive of that. I think that it's okay to err on the side of caution and be very thoughtful about this. I think one of the best things about where we are is that we're having greater discussions about it. We're not treating it as an elephant in the room. It's coming. I expect it to pass statewide in November. And so I'm all for being proactive instead of being reactive, and I think we're doing that. But I don't think there's any easy answers to this, and so I'm all for taking it as slow as we have to, but also being smart and wise about doing what's in the best interest of our residents ultimately.
Thank you, Commissioner. And speaking of being wise, I think it'd be wise to look at other communities who did have a number and they're trying to rein it in and reduce the number and they're struggling, as well as several cities who've put moratoriums in place because of the proliferation. So again, I do think it's incumbent on us to learn from other communities on where they wish they would have been more thoughtful up front and on the front end. And it's far easier to start with a smaller number and make amendments in the future than to do the reverse.
Yep.
Commissioner Repart.
Yeah, so the thing for me is this is one that we can't kick down the field too far. We've got to make a decision. So I think that obviously the Planning Commission made a lot of recommendations, some of which I agree with, some of which are really creative. But I think that, I've sat up here for 6 months now and we haven't gotten to the point where we've agreed as a group and made a decision about something like this. And so I think that the commitment that I need, if we are going to push forward the original recommendations to for the future is that we're gonna have to figure this out together, and I just wanna make sure that when we have that discussion, that line by line, we consider what the planning commission has put forth, because some of the adjustments that they made are really creative, and some of them I don't understand, but we do have that ability to make that decision, and we're gonna have to do it because there's a clock that's ticking on this particular thing, so.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I just want to say too that my reservations are really around what other cities in the state have done in terms of pulling back a bit after they felt that they went too far. And I do want to have time to get this out to the corridor improvement districts, this information, because they are those commercial districts, as Commissioner O'Connor pointed out. You know, they're not included, and these maps are drastically different, just as your numbers were, Commissioner Jones. So we're going to have to probably land in the middle, and I think that we need to proceed with this again in having our community as educated as possible in making these decisions, because I think it's easier to add than it is to take away. So that's my only reason. I think that we're in support. We recognize that the polling numbers are like 62% that the recreational is going to pass in November, so that's our reality. We've got a clock ticking. So we've got some work to do in the interim, and I think maybe we need to think about getting together and better understanding this and putting these options side by side, probably immediately after the public hearing, so that we can also add, you know, the planning commission, what we've done, and then the public hearing. And then finally, just a point of clarification, if we vote yes on this motion, we move forward with the planning commissions. If we don't, we still need to move forward with the other this morning.
Yes, correct. So, and so, Commissioner, I should make sure that this is really clear, because I don't want there to be a misperception. So this isn't about this body supporting medical marijuana or recreational marijuana. That's not the issue. Many of us publicly supported medical marijuana. Many of us publicly supported decriminalization of marijuana. Some of us maybe publicly in the future supporting recreational marijuana. This isn't how this body feels about the use of marijuana. This is a land use issue. And so I want to make sure that we don't muddy the waters and have this perception being that we either support or oppose the use of marijuana. That is not what this is about. This is land use, and we wrestle with this all the time. In fact, we're doing it right now with liquor. So I just want to make sure that that's really clear. So the amendment at hand is to move forward to the language from Planning Commission. I'm going to weigh on that. I appreciate the input from the Planning Commission. However, I don't support moving forward with the language they recommended. I support the original language to have a public hearing about, and then we can, after hearing from a larger breadth of the community, once they fully understand the issue at hand, we can, as a body, come back and make some amendments. So I'm going to be voting no on the amendment. So I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, raise your hand if you are a nay. I think I heard more of those. Okay, so that fails. Does someone want to put forward a recommendation to move forward with the original language as proposed?
So moved.
Support. Okay, so then the question at hand is to set a public hearing on proposed zoning ordinance text amendments relative to medical marijuana, and that would be the original language proposed with the we all saw that language, so I'm not going to go through it. Suzanne kind of talked about that. So additional thoughts. The public hearing would be set for July 10th, and then it would come back to us for additional conversation at July 24th.
Yes.
Commissioner?
Whoever moved the motion, would they be interested in modifying the motion to not only include what the original proposal was, but also include the Planning Commission's proposal? Because I think it helps the public to see what those options are. And so it would have to be amended to include both, whoever has the motion. Otherwise, I'll be a nay to this, and then I'll put my own motion up. You have the opportunity to modify.
You're making the clerk very happy.
So I think we need to put forward, my understanding is we need to put forward an ordinance text amendment. We can always add language for what's made available to the public to see clearly the difference. But we have to move forward for the public hearing the text amendment that is being proposed. Is that correct? City Attorney? Okay, correct.
Yeah.
We can't put forward two and ask for public comment on both.
Right, but I completely understand where Commissioner Lanier is coming from, because that was going to be my next comment, that we, and this is a good start, but that people really need to be able to see these side by side.
Right.
So that they can, and I know you've done that before for us.
Yep.
A simple side by side, this is one ordinance proposal and here's the other, so you can compare.
Why
Because
couldn't
there
the
are-
text, why couldn't the text have both options? Even if they're color coded,
Then we need to go with John's motion, because then that's what we did with housing. Is that we
Right.
pushed forth the planning commissions, and then we showed what they adjusted from. So you can show what we adjusted from if we put forth what the planning commission did. To do it the opposite
I don't think we
way-
did that, actually. I don't think that's correct.
That wasn't the
Commissioner.
hearing notice.
That
You have
wasn't
to-
the public hearing notice. It's different if it's informational versus text like zoning ordinance text amendments. I do think we could put for informational with the public hearing notice, a summary of the difference as well as the actual language from the planning commission.
Yep, we can definitely do that. The key is that the clerk has to publish an ordinance.
Right.
So it's whatever that ordinance is, and the planning commission didn't add anything other than that 1,000 foot, but they deleted mostly.
A lot of
So
things, yeah.
we can add language in the public hearing notice that identifies those differences, but the ordinance language that you would be considering would be what you'd want published.
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So Suzanne, can you work on creating something like that so that we can take a look at it? Because I'm sure all of
Absolutely.
us want to make sure that we're getting the information out to the people we represent.
Yep, we can definitely do that.
All right. Any other questions or comments about that? Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Yay.
It carries. All right. So Suzanne, can you send, thank you, Commissioner. Can you, Commissioner Kelly made the original motion and Commissioner Allen seconded.
The
Oh.
original motion to set the public hearing, you just had two amendments. One failed, one passed, so you still have to vote on the original motion.
I did make that motion.
I think Commissioner
No, I
Kelly
know-
did.
I know, but you haven't voted on the original motion. Or are you still discussing, I'm sorry.
No, I thought we just did.
No, you,
But I'll call the question again. So, resolution,
no, you voted on which one you're gonna put forward. But you had, that was an amendment to the original motion. So, you still have to
I
do the
don't-
motion out.
No.
What was the amendment to the original motion? I don't think there
No.
was.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I think I made a motion to put forth the planning commission recommendation because that's what I thought the original motion was.
And that failed.
That failed.
And then you put the recommendation to do the original
Yes.
proposal and that passed.
All right, I had three motions.
Oh, sorry.
We'll clarify.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay, and so what we will be providing you is, we'll work to set up a series of public meetings. We already have one scheduled at the Baxter neighborhood. Just verified that today for the 25th. To Commissioner Lanier's point, we'll do a story map or other things on the website, so it's all readily available, similar to the Housing Now that's there. We'll send you the public hearing notice language, so you can see that with what the Planning Commission will have. We also set meetings with the SID district so that they can review and discuss, because this has the most impact on those areas. And then we'll also try to do additional research on what other communities, the unintended consequences and any advice that they might have.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Suzanne, thank you for all your work on this, both here at the local level and at the state level. Thanks. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to a resolution adopting the Grand Valley Regional Biosolids Authority 2019 Operations and Maintenance Budget.
So moved.
Support.
All right. So, Mr. Michael Lon, you want to tell us about this?
Certainly. Good morning, Commissioners. This is apparently the 10th time I've brought this to you for budget. You'll see the overall budget is about $8 million. It was about $8 million last year. Our portion is about $5.4 million. That's consistent with last year. In 2 years, you'll see that adjustments to that budget based on the new biodigestion project, and I can't believe it's been 10 times I've brought this before you.
right, commissioners, questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? See, because you brought it forward so many times, we didn't have a lot of questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right, next that will take us to a resolution to consider adoption of the 2019 city budget ordinance.
So moved.
Support.
All right,
This one's
Our
going to go just
CFO?
as easy, correct?
all right, we'll see. Well, I don't know about that.
So
All
good
right,
morning, Mayor and
Jeff.
Commissioners. We have two items this morning. The first one is to consider adoption of the FY19 city budget ordinance. So on April 24th, it seems like forever ago, but the fiscal plan was released. We've held several sessions and made some changes throughout the course of the many weeks. We had a public hearing last Tuesday, and then our requires the budget to be adopted within a week of the public hearing. So it's before you today. You will see the changes, and I'm going to go through them real quickly. It's brought our total citywide appropriations to just over $590 million, and the general fund around just over $142 million. So from the preliminary fiscal plan to the final plan, we have 5 delete positions. You can see 3 court positions and the 2 communications office positions. Those were deleted. The police and fire pension rates, we got a revised actuarial report, which typically happens every year, so we updated those numbers for the final plan. CDBG got their final funding, so we updated those numbers, as you can see here. And then several other changes. We added the $1 million for community and police relations in FY23. That was not in the preliminary plan. We reduced the dispatch fund subsidy by $110,184. We increased experienced GR support in all years by $100,000 additional per year from the general operating fund. We had to decrease the FMS budget, and this was due to timing of payments. So we had to pay them additional this year, $505,800, but it's still within the authority of that budget, so we had to reduce next year's allocation. We reduced the district court operating fund subsidy by $300,000 to account for those deleted positions. Again, we removed the 2 communications department employees and then put the additional ones that we're going to move to the executive back to their original positions, and that was per the discussion last week. We increased the library capital fund budget by $200,000, and that was to advance a boiler replacement that has failed, so that needed to be changed. And then we added some additional bond money for the MLK Lodge to the fire station proposed bonds in the capital reserve fund. And that gives $800,000 seed capital for that project. And again, there remains $50,000 for pre-construction services in there. We added 2 years of GOF support for the Southtown SID in FY19 and FY20. And then we added 1 year of capital support for the Southtown SID in the capital reserve fund in 19. And then we also created the equitable investment fund by not transferring as much from the transformation fund. We kept $750,000 in that fund for equitable investments in the third ward going forward. And then the adjustment, we had adjusted debt service on the Knapp's Crossing by the new agreement that was passed. That was a change. And then we reappropriated the full amount of the Knapp's, the second phase of that, if it goes forward, for $6.4 million. Before they had that spread out over the term, but we would be appropriating all those resources if that's done in FY19. And then we added the acquisition cost for the Division Avenue Fire Station land to the price of the bond too, so we added $585 for that. And then we had to adjust a couple police capital items. We removed ballistic door panels in FY20 for $147,883. And then we removed a capital request for police for $300,000 for real-time crime prevention. We moved it from 20 to FY21. And then every time we make an adjustment, the Parks MOE updates, so we made that final adjustment. So those are all the changes from preliminary to final. And I'd really like to thank my budget staff for the very dedicated and hard work. Scott, Sane, Keith Hybor, Molly Eastman, and Carrie Mendez. They did significant, great job this year. So
I see them in the back. So thank you.
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
So also in the budget ordinance, you might want to note the 2 paragraphs that are important, number 9 and 10, I think. So one is that puts in the amount, or puts in the language about investing for equity in the future and having a process for that. And the other is adoption of the transformation plan. So those are both new in the ordinance this year. So.
Okay. I'll start with questions and I'll turn to my colleagues. So Jeff, 2 things. One, With the recent information we received from the county with the changes in their tipping fees, both for the waste to energy as well as recycling, will that impact our refuse millage?
I'd have to have James, I think.
Not at this time.
I'm saying no.
I think what we're planning to do with that is not change the millage levy this year, because I think it's going to be a half-year impact, not a full-year impact, and we'll use reserves. So we may need to do a budget amendment, but we don't need to adjust the income tax or the millage levy for refuse.
Okay. And then secondly, Jeff, in light of a couple comments at our public hearing, can you just speak a little bit to our commitment to our unfunded liabilities and our plan for that, as well as the level of savings that we have, and maybe even touch on our current bond rating?
Sure, I'll answer the last one first. We're currently a AA bond rating with a stable outlook, which is pretty good. AAA is the highest rated. Kent County's that's obviously what we strive for. One of the things they do look for is reserves. So on the fiscal committee agenda this morning was actually a budget amendment to supplement the budget stabilization fund back to its 10% limit. So that was an additional $750,000, and that did pass at fiscal today. We are projecting to be around 21% fund balance, unassigned fund balance in the general fund at the end of FY19. And that includes, our budget includes every year full funding of the actuarially determined amounts for both pension and OPEB. So I know we did some OPEB overlooks in previous budget reviews, and you can see we've got, last I checked, about $62 million in reserves for our unfunded OPEB liabilities, up from zero just 11 short years ago. So we have made significant progress in that. And each and every year, I think we're at 59% of employees in the new defined contribution retiree healthcare plan, and about 41% then in the DP plan. So as these people continue to retire, we see that mix change, and the DC contribution is considerably less than that defined benefit piece. So we continue to watch that each and every year, and we continue to fund not only our current costs, but the unfunded piece. And each of the OPEB plans have a different lifespan, so they look at the ages and the projected retirement dates. So they vary on the unfunded piece. I think some of them are 21 years, some of them are less, so they continue to watch that we match our revenues with the expected expenses in those funds. So as far as pension goes, we continue, again, we're about 80 to 82% funded in both plans. This year's we had really good returns in the police and fire. As you know, the stock market was soaring last year, so that actually reduced some of our out-year projected contributions. So it's something we continue to fund and keep track of each and every year.
Yeah, thank you. And we knew when we made the changes to OPEB that it was the long view.
Correct.
That we would have some initial upfront costs, but in the long run, we would eliminate that liability long term.
And we also use a conservative 5% rate of return on all of those plans, as opposed to our pension is 7.15% now. So it's a very conservative return estimate on those plans.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Allen?
So this is my last budget meeting, my last committee of the whole, so I want to make just a couple comments. This was, in my opinion, no, not to speak anything ill of anything prior, but one of the best budget sessions that I've been through. I think it was very interactive. There was a lot of feedback. The list of changes from start to finish is about as long as I've ever seen it. Being third ward commissioner, I'm really appreciative of the look towards the future in regards to equity, and equity as being defined not just equal spending amongst the wards, but closing the disparity gap. We're seeing now in this new budget money starting to go into the Affordable Housing Fund, which is living up to our commitment. I would encourage, as you go forward, I would encourage a strong look at the police chief's A3 when it comes to adding 10 community police officers. I think that's something that I'm hearing quite a bit in the community, particularly those at night. I think that makes just a lot of sense. So again, I'm Jeff, just incredibly proud of you and your team. And you took some of my fire a little bit from this morning, but this morning in fiscal, we reallocated about $850,000 of reserve funds to adjust certain funds, brought our fund balance up to where it needs to be. It's through that strong fiscal management that our city and our staff do that we're able to make these changes. So I don't view those budget amendments as a negative thing. I view them as a positive thing. So at the end of the year, we had our fund balance. It will end at zero. With some.
Not the fund balance at zero.
Not the fund balance. The contingent balance. I apologize. The contingent balance. And then I'll finish by saying I echo Jeff's comments and the mayor's comments about our unfunded liabilities when it comes to pension. We cannot make knee-jerk decisions today about something that we really don't know, and I think we're making reasonable and responsible changes each year incrementally to move towards that. So the 5% compared to 7% is a perfect example of that on what we see as a return compared to where we landed it. So I'm proud of this budget. I think it's a good thing all in all, and I'm very much in support of passing it.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And I'll add, Commissioner, I will be working on this today to try to get 2 briefings scheduled, Commissioners, in July. One to take a deep dive into the LED light. I shouldn't even call it that because it's really the entire light system and underground. So we're working on setting up a briefing to take a deep dive into that, and then also the public safety, which will include the A3 along with a number of other items. So we're going to work on getting those on our schedules. Hopefully something locked in today. So other questions or comments about the budget, colleagues? Appreciate everyone who spent a lot of time and energy on this.
Yeah, again, I want to thank you, Jeff, and your team, and Eric for getting this all done. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, any other final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to all of you who have worked really hard with us, with staff, to get this done. I think we're in an excellent position. Jeff, I think our reserves are at the highest level they've been historically, which is a credit to all of you and to all of our staff. We are investing for outcomes. We're investing for equity. We're continuing to transform, and we're creating a great organization. And we couldn't do it without stewards like you, and really appreciate your many contributions to this budget and the process, starting with us back in November and tracking through priorities and getting into the budget presentation. So it's been a really good team effort, and I appreciate where we are, and I'm also very happy with this budget. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Commissioners, what I would like to do after today, similar to what we did last year, is I would like to get your feedback on process as well as format. The format for the fiscal plan has changed over the years. And I know some of us had comments about that. So I'd like to get that feedback while it's still fresh in our minds. So after today, I'll send out, last year we did like a survey monkey to get feedback, and then that was aggregated and pulled together. So I would like to do that as well. Hopefully by the end of this week, I'll get something to all of you to just get your feedback.
Well, and I think it'd be also helpful to get staff's feedback. If you have suggestions, having gone through it from your point of view, so you've got a team that's worked on it, and I'd love to get your feedback as well.
It's a good idea. Good idea.
Serious feedback.
All right. Confidential feedback. That's usually when you get the honest feedback. You can say that publicly, but I'll send out a survey. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right. Last, that'll take us to a resolution establishing a 2018 property tax millage rate.
So moved. Support.
All right.
Great,
Jeff,
so this is a companion item to adopting the budget. This is establishing our 2018 property tax millage rate. You will see by the agenda item, we are proposing millages of 8.9710, which is a slight decrease from last year by 0.0548. That is due to a Headley rollback, which is created when anytime the rate of growth exceeds the CPI as established by the state. So the average homeowner in the city of Grand Rapids for the city millage only would see about a $17.62 increase. The average price of a house is $51,520. So even though the millage slightly declined, the price of housing actually went up a little bit. So, but very, very stagnant property tax rates for 18.
Okay, great. Commissioners, any questions about that? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So Commissioners, we have public safety meeting coming up momentarily. And then we have a legislative meeting, and then we're back in here tonight at 7 p.m. And with that, our committee of the whole is adjourned.